So there are some basic and fundamental problems with this belief that the nature of reality and the nature of the absolute is pure consciousness. And I will provide to you my reasoning why this is the case, that this is largely a mental projection without any basis in reality. First and foremost, consider this, that if at the very ground of creation you were to find nothing else but pure consciousness, this suggests something interesting to consider, that it's not consciousness which is included within the laws of physics. However, it is physics which stems out of consciousness. If this is truly the case, think of this. You should be able, through sheer subjective will, to just set the planets out of their orbits. You should be able to, just through sheer subjective will, modify the laws of physics. And nobody has been capable of such a thing. Yes, perhaps you might raise the argument that, oh, there are these sages or other beings who have been capable of performing certain miracles. What about that? Well, this is something that can only be accepted on the basis of faith. The fact of the matter is, if we look throughout history, if such people were capable of such supernormal abilities, then without exception, they would have made themselves immortal in the body, and yet all of them have died without exception. This does not seem to be, not even a single one of them has turned their body into an immortal substance. So they were not able to escape the inescapable reality of the physical death of the body. And the other thing to consider is that if what you're considering to be absolute truth is truly unthinkable, if it's truly immeasurable and beyond all categories of thought, that means that you must abandon all attachment to knowledge. This includes abandoning the belief in eternal consciousness. If we're very genuinely sincere about this matter, we will see that this is only an idea that can be accepted on the basis of faith. There are traditions like Advaita Vedanta which do say that the nature of reality is pure consciousness, and I can understand why such a misunderstanding has happened, because when you do enter very deeply into yourself through meditation and all activity of the mind has come to a stillness, what remains shining forth in your perception is pure consciousness. And the sense of that pure consciousness can be so profound, so overwhelming. When you examine actually your consciousness and you try to find where are its edges, where are its borders, they are not to be found anywhere. On the contrary, it's your own consciousness which is animating everything you're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, feeling. Consciousness is the very stuff through which any kind of experience may happen. So I can understand where the misunderstanding lies because of that profound sense that is often accompanied with the experience of pure consciousness. However, something that is immense and overwhelming, that does not make it infinite. Consider this. The speed of light is tremendous, isn't it? And yet, light travels at a finite speed. So what has happened here is that, yes, there has come calmness and quietness of the mind. Pure consciousness is radiating and shining forth, but certain sages took the unnecessary step of becoming identified with this consciousness. And through that identification, therefore, one claims that the same consciousness is all-pervading. I want you to look very closely at this, that no amount of inner experience is ever going to be able to verify such a thing. Yes, you can experience pure consciousness, but how do you know that such consciousness is eternal and all-pervading, since you have never experienced anything outside of the boundaries of your consciousness? And therefore that leaves us with another option. If it can't be verified through inner experience, then the only other option is external evidence. And of course, we do not have any external evidence to support such a thing. So that the concept now of pure consciousness being eternal and absolute must be recognized that this can only be accepted on the basis of faith. Finally, there's another very important point here, which is that there is no such thing, and this is what the striking insight of a Buddha. This is why I consider certain sages like Gautama Buddha to be in a completely different class of sages because they recognized all these psychological games that I'm explaining to you right now. There's the insight in a truly awakened consciousness is that nothing in the universe depends upon any singular force for existence. There is no permanent center of authority here. And strangely enough, that lack of a permanent center of authority is itself its own authority. I'll explain what I mean when I say a lack of a permanent center of authority. Take, for example, many of you might have heard this statement that everything stems out of silence, and that silence is in fact the source of creation. But can silence exist outside of the concept of sound? And can sound exist outside of the concept of silence? If one disappears from your mental vision, the other extreme also disappears. They are interdependent. So therefore, it's not that any singular force, there's some singular force upon which the whole existence revolves. This is simply against the laws of nature. This is not a good understanding of how the mechanisms of nature function. So, where does that leave us? That leaves us with emptiness, with Shunya. What is Shunya? It's precisely this, that things are already whole, holistic, and complete in themselves. So just consider that nothing can exist as an independent reality of its own, but everything is so deeply intertwined in such a complex matrix of interconnections. So, I've always considered one of the most insightful statements to come from Lao Tzu, who said that the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. Or what I like to say is, whatever you think it is of the absolute reality, that is precisely what it is not. Which, in fact, let me take a few steps back. I had just talked about emptiness, but even emptiness itself is another limited concept that is to be abandoned. That shows you just how unfathomable the nature of a reality is. So why, we have to acknowledge, why have these ideas of eternal consciousness, and also by extension, the idea of a supreme being have come into being? Well, it's very simple. These are both projections that stem out of the illusion of self. It seems that there's something very deep in human nature which refuses to accept that we live in a universe which is indifferent to the desires of man. It's not the ocean which must bend its ways to man. It is man who must come to terms with the ocean. We do not want to feel as though we are living in a universe which is indifferent to our being. That makes the universe a frightening and intimidating place to live. So, out of the fear of not knowing, all these fictions have been invented. So, there can be no greater realization than to live through the mind which has been cleared of the illusion of self. Once the mind is cleared of the illusion of self, you will see that these concepts of eternal consciousness and a supreme being must inevitably come to an end. And it's not, by the way, that I do not acknowledge that the idea, for example, of a supreme being can in certain contexts be useful. It can be useful. Sometimes what is false can be much more effective in assisting another towards their well-being and liberation than the truth, because of the inner attitude that it creates within the mind. And if a certain inner attitude can be much more fruitful and yet false, then that is a useful stepping stone along the path. So consider certain ideas as a temporary placebo, and it's not realistic to believe that The whole humanity can be fit into the small cage of one particular way of thinking. This is just unrealistic. We must respect the tremendous diversity that exists in humanity. However, I am saying that sooner or later, as your insight, self-knowledge, and awareness deepens, certain concepts must become abandoned sooner or later. It's just simply impossible to continue carrying certain ideas once you rise to a certain level of awareness. So, this might or might not clarify certain issues for some people, but nevertheless, I express these ideas. Just take it as food for thought. I don't want you to accept what I'm saying on the basis of faith either, but rather to maintain one's independence of thought and examine and inquire into what it is that I'm pointing towards. After all, as it has been said in Zen, anything whatsoever that can be said about truth is just a finger pointing to the moon. And whatever we can say about truth, we should also acknowledge there's always so much that's left unsaid. Because this is the nature of our language, isn't it? Language can only express things through a certain one-sided perspective. It cannot express all dimensions simultaneously. So even the most striking insights, which do reflect a mind that has come to clarity of perception, those views, they too are one-sided. But since we cannot avoid committing the act of one-sidedness, we have to just simply inquire, does this one-sided perspective come out of a mind which has come to clarity of perception and is liberated of the illusion of self? Or does such insights come from a mind which is still clouded in ignorance of its true nature? And similarly, our words will reflect the depth of our insight. Even though they might be inadequate, even though they might be paralyzed to approach the truth. Nevertheless, where there is clarity of vision, that clarity of vision is reflected through one's words. So, therefore, it's just a matter of trying to offer a skillful means to others that can assist them towards their liberation.